It's pre-show time. Gather round, gather round.
It is, and you see, I'm wearing what our patrons are wearing. I'm a seersucker because it's summertime, 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 summertime. It really is, and you know how we know that?
How?
What holiday is Monday?
Memorial Day.
Exactly. And apart from being a day of mourning for our gallant lads and lasses now in all our nation's wars, it's also, and yes, a 3-day weekend, and yes, a barbecue day. I'm aware. It's also the beginning of summer.
I never knew it marked that. That's interesting.
Well, the social beginning of summer. I mean, chronologically, summer doesn't really begin until June 1st. But socially speaking, in terms of customs and manners, it's Memorial Day to Labor Day.
You know, so you're talking about barbecues. So,
Barbecues, summer suits,
mm,
summer dresses, although I don't wear those.
so
I've not been yassified, so I don't wear summer dresses.
I was thinking about this when I was reading Solange Hertz, and she was talking about barbecues and sort of American culture and stuff like this. And it just occurred to me that maybe does Europe barbecue at all? Like, how does
Yeah,
Europe approach barbecues? Is it the
yeah,
same
they
sort
have
of
barbecues.
American type style?
Yeah. No, I mean it's there's only so many ways to cook food outside.
But I mean, like, okay, so for example, Memorial Day, big barbecue
They were not on
weekend.
Memorial Day. They do it on different days.
Well, that's what
They
I
don't.
was. Well, that's what I was gonna say. Like, what
Well,
days are
like
big barbecue days in
there
Europe?
will be this Monday. It's a day off, but not because it's Memorial Day. It's Whit Monday.
Is that like a so that's like
It's
a national day off for various countries or something?
yeah. Whit Monday is, you know how Pentecost is also called Whit Sunday,
Okay.
and you know how in most of Europe you get the day after Christmas and Stephen's Day or Boxing Day you get off, and you get the day after Easter, Easter Monday off. Well, you get the day after Pentecost because remember, traditionally, Christmas, Easter, Pentecost were the three big feasts of the calendar, the three biggest feasts. Easter is the greatest, Christmas follows, and Pentecost is the last of the three. And each of them originally, uh, the 3 days of Christmas, the 3 days of Easter, 3 days of Pentecost were liturgically equal.
What does that
So the
mean?
remnant, well, it means that you would have you would tend to have a high mass on St. Stephen's Day and on St. John's Day. You have a high mass on Easter Monday and Easter Tuesday, and a high mass on Whit Monday and Whit Tuesday.
Those are okay. I see.
They were holy days of obligation,
I see.
but eventually the Tuesdays were done away with, and then the Mondays and St. Stephen's Day.
How do you spell wit? WHIT?
Yeah,
And what does that mean?
white. It refers to the color of the vestments.
Oh,
Whit Sunday, Whit Monday, Whit Tuesday.
interesting. Okay.
But Pentecost is a big deal. You know, just so you'll know, ladies and gentlemen, we're actually doing the show on the Vigil of Pentecost, which in the pre-55 rite was like a somewhat shortened version of the Easter Vigil with the 6 prophecies, I think, or 7, blessing of the font, all that stuff. And if that weren't bad enough, uh, in the Byzantine rite to this day, the Saturday before Pentecost is the biggest of, I think there are 5 of them, but the Vigil of Pentecost is the biggest Soul Saturday. They don't have All Souls Day, so they commemorate the dead very much on this day and on the 4 other Soul Saturdays scattered through the year. There's Saturday because that was when our Lord was in the tomb.
Wow. Okay, so you just said a lot there. What are the prophecies? Are those going to be Old Testament or something else?
It's there are some, I don't remember exactly which ones, but there's some of the ones you heard on the pre-55 vigil, but not all of them. So they're Old Testament.
Okay, so that's prophesying Christ then, probably.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then they have the blessing of the font and so forth. The pre-55. Let me just look up something here. Pre-1955, and which, by the way, you can also see in Dom Guéranger, of course. Uh, let's see. Pre-1955 Pentecost Vigil, Mass Propers. Here we go. Pre-55 Vigil of Holy Week. There's a lot of pushing for the restoration of the pre-55 Holy Week, which is funny. You know, as the authorities are trying to crack down on the 62 Mass and so on, those people who are actually living it are going the other way. Uh,
Okay.
so let's see. The where I'm not seeing what I want. There's Tenebrae. Holy Saturday is all rites of Holy Week, but I want uh, the pre. Well, I'm not seeing it, and I don't want to. I don't want to waste time looking for it. But there it is. Okay. Yeah, the pre-55 vigil of Pentecost was quite elaborate. Um, Whitsun Eve. So the first prophecy is Genesis 22:119. The second prophecy is from Exodus. The third is the Canticle of Moses. The fourth is taken from Isaiah. The fifth is from Baruch. The sixth is from Ezekiel. Yeah, so there's just 6 of them. And then with the purple cope, there's the blessing of the font, which is again um, just like Holy Saturday. Then the litany, and then the Mass finally. So I've done it a couple times before. It's shorter than the Saturday Vigil, but it's quite impressive.
Isn't the Saturday Vigil like literally the longest service of the year?
It sure is.
Okay, so that's not saying a lot. Well, it's shorter than the longest service of the year.
Yeah, but I mean, it's obviously based on the same thing. But you know, they don't have the blessing of the new fire and all that. So it's you know,
Yeah.
it's good stuff.
All right, questions. We've got 2 questions from Philip. First
Yeah.
question. He says, "How does the experience of living in present-day America compare with a stiff dose of purgatory?" Ooh.
Well, despite the annoyances of the everyday, not much. Purgatory, we're told, is hot and unpleasant. The returnees from purgatory, you know, burn crosses into things and so forth. It's a lot worse.
Yeah, I plugged this on the show a long time ago. It's a very small little booklet, Fire of Love, by Saint Catherine of Genoa, I believe.
Yes, Catherine of Genoa.
And boy, she's a saint for our time too. Now that I think about it, I just actually finished reading The Spirit of Father Damien, which was one of my all-time. It's just such an inspiring book. But Catherine of Genoa, she had been a nurse in with her husband. They had, I think, a Josephite marriage, and they were ministering to people suffering from the plague,
Yeah.
where 2/3 of their villages are getting eradicated, and they're sticking it out. Anyhow, she was a visionary, and she said that purgatory is very much similar to hell in a lot of senses, but there's only one difference. I think she said and she used the metaphor, which I think stuck with a lot of people last time I said it, so I'll repeat it again. She said, pretend, that you're wasting, imagine you're wasting away in the desert. You're absolutely parched as can be. It's absolutely miserable. You're withering away and you're crawling and you're journeying. And purgatory is basically purgatory is when there's some bread out there that will eternally feed you, that there's an end game that at some point, who knows how long, but you'll eventually get there, and there is that hope. Hell, there is no hope. There is
No,
no bread.
and really in purgatory, there's certainty. I mean, you will eventually go to heaven sooner or later,
Yeah.
however much pain you're going through. And that, I mean, there's pain and there's horror, but there's also the certainty and the knowledge that it won't last forever. Also, although they can't do themselves any good, they can't pray for themselves. The holy souls in purgatory can pray for us. And presumably, their ability to pray for us and do us good brings them some joy.
I actually was thinking of you the other day. I go on a lot of mountain hikes, and I do a lot of praying, and I have a certain visualization when I sometimes try when I'm saying the Rosary and the Hail Marys, where I'm picturing Mary in front of a celestial court, and it's very
Mm.
grand and very amazing. And then I'm kneeling in front of her, and um, each Hail Mary, I'm sort of offering up kind of a pathetic rose, because it's as pathetic as my Hail Mary. And then obviously I'm asking for the favor, in exchange for the roses. Pray for me now and at my death. Um, but so I have that image. But I had a different image too of various people that um were behind me praying with me. People who I don't get along with but are Catholic, but we're having a lot of trouble right now. And I thought that I'm uniting my prayer with their future selves, assuming that they're in purgatory and assuming
Hmm.
that time is non-linear,
Or maybe even your own.
or maybe even my own what?
Well, you might go to purgatory,
Oh, you're right.
so as might I. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, and that's something to bear in mind, especially when you're annoyed by people on Twitter. Uh, they may annoy you, or even me, but presuming that they're devout and so on, however misguided they may be, or however misguided we may be, our prayers are really united.
Right. Because obviously, like, they hate my guts. Um, and so
Well, I mean,
I was reading stuff where it's like, okay, the presence of God is in them. And so it's like, well,
yeah.
how do I make this work? How do I abandon my restlessness? How am I charitable? And then that ended up happening, and I thought, okay, that's nice. So not I'm not jiving with who they are currently, but maybe one day when everything's revealed, when everything's clear, that their their future selves might be united to my prayer in some way. Does that make sense
It
metaphysically?
does, it does, and also bear this in mind: they don't really know you, and you don't really know them. But, well, I mean, I'll give you an example from history. Saint Wilfrid and Saint Bernard of Clairvaux couldn't stand each other, and they said very unkind things about one another. But they're both in heaven as saints now. Really, they were on the same team, although they couldn't see it.
Hmm. Yeah.
And that, because obviously neither of them was really able to understand the other, because if they could, they would have seen the sanctity of the other, but they couldn't see it.
Yeah.
I mean, fortunately, they were reconciled, but think of when St. Augustine and St. Jerome were at each other's throats.
Right.
Uh, so That's another reason, we should meditate on those things as well, because it can mean that our supposed enemies who are of the household of the faith may not be as horrible as we think they are, and we may not be as wonderful as we think we are.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it works both ways. They may not be as wonderful as they think they are, and we may not be as horrible as they think that we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that all came about because I'm trying to read more of the Bible. That's a really underrated book. But
Oh, it's a Protestant book, don't you know? I
but
never read it.
I'll try.
Protestants are always quoting it.
And the thing, the one parable that really grabbed me because it was so challenging. It's perhaps the most challenging, honestly. It's I was in Matthew, and Jesus was talking about be perfect as the Father is perfect.
Oh,
Where regardless of how evil a person is being or whatever, the sun shines down on everybody,
oh.
regardless. And so then, so too with your love has to be like that. I thought like that, like indiscriminately.
Well, what you could do is try to love the best of them. It's funny. I just wrote an article, and the neither the subject nor the persons I wrote it for are important. What matter is that uh, we have to bear in mind that our we should love our families, our towns, our provinces or states, our countries, the West, and humanity as a whole. And I said this is one area, thinking of their lists of world heritage and intangible heritage, that I think our friends at the UN have it right, in a sense that all that's best in human culture is our common heritage, our common property. And when you
Hmm,
think about the best that every society and every culture has produced, as opposed to the crap, and they've all produced something worthwhile, it's something we all have a share in.
hmm,
But to put this another way, the great temples of Taishan have absolutely no use for the deities who are worshipped there. But the beauty of the construction, although it's misaimed, is still part of the great heritage of mankind. The loveliness that we're able to produce at our best. And then, of course, that also goes for all of the various natural wonders that the world is filled with. Uh, Not just Niagara Falls, but Victoria Falls and Iguazu Falls, if you see what I mean.
yeah.
All of them are part of that planet that God has created for us.
Hmm. All right, thank you for that, Charles. Philip also asks, he says, can you say anything about the suppression of the Society of Jesus?
Yes. I wish it would happen soon.
Whoa.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood. No, I'm sure that Philip is referring to the suppression in 1773. Yeah, I could actually say quite a bit. Uh, the Jesuits had become extremely successful throughout Europe and throughout the colonial world, as missionaries, as uh, uh, as backers of the Counter Reformation, and so on. But starting in Portugal in the 1750s, the quote unquote enlightened despots on the various Catholic thrones uh, were didn't like them, uh, partly because their loyalty was to the Pope over that of any given kingdom. And so, starting with Portugal, and this allowed the King of Portugal to attack the Jesuit mission state of Paraguay, successively in the Portuguese Empire, the Spanish Empire, the French Empire, Naples, Parma, Austria, in one Catholic country after another, the Jesuits were expelled. But they survived in the Papal States and various other places. And a lot of pressure was brought to bear on Pope Clement XIII to suppress them. He refused. So they had to wait until he died and Clement XIV came in. And they were able to get him to agree to the suppression of the Jesuits. And that's one reason, for instance, Father John Carroll had been the head of the Jesuits in Maryland. When they were suppressed, he sort of reorganized them as the Priests of Maryland or something. And that's a lot of them did that. They came up with these weird organizations to carry on what they were doing. But interestingly, the Jesuits had schools and churches in Russia and Prussia, which were Orthodox and Protestant. So Frederick II of Prussia, called by some people the Great, and Catherine II of Russia, also called by some people the Great, they refused to allow the papal bull of suppression to be published in their domains. So the Jesuits in Russia and Prussia kept on keeping on. And that is why, after in 1817, I think, Pius VII reestablished the Jesuits. It was through the Russian and Prussian provinces of the order that their lineage was maintained. Although, of course, it was an old joke in the late 20th century when the Jesuits started to go crazy. People asked, "Do you think it was the same order that got reestablished as was suppressed?" Maybe they mistakenly revived a different order that was horrible. But the truth was, for most of the 19th century and into the 20th, the Jesuits were pretty good. But they began to crack a bit after World War One, and then after Vatican II, it all hung out.
You said that the Pope was pressured into suppressing the Jesuits.
Yes.
How do you pressure the Pope in that context?
Oh, you cut off money. You threaten the Papal States. You do things like that.
Okay, but I remember one of the things that you mentioned. One of the dynamics that has changed with the Vatican is that now Peter's Pence is more weaponized, and there's less, which is why we have all these bishops doing crazy things, and there's less ability to discipline, or because if you discipline, you're losing money that you need really badly, right?
Yeah, it's the same thing. The difference is that instead of coming from kings, it comes from bishops.
Okay, so but the Vatican wasn't. I mean, they weren't they're better off then, right? I
They
mean,
were better off, but they still had their needs. And the truth is that there was also the problem that each of these people did a lot for the church in other ways. So, for instance, the entirety of the church in Latin America, and that means California and the missions, was financed by King Carlos III. So when he says, "I want you to do something," you take note of it in a way that you wouldn't someone else. It was, in fact, because of the suppression of the Jesuits who had the missions in Baja California that St. Junipero Serra came to Baja. And then when Carlos III said, "Well, the Russians are coming down the coast, you better get up there," he said, "Well, I can do that, but I can't run both the Baja missions and set up a whole new chain." So the Dominicans took over the Baja missions. Father Serra founded one mission in Baja, in the far north, when the news came that the king wanted him to shift. And shift he did. And the rest is California history.
can you give us just a very quickly a list of some of the Jesuit missionaries, some of the greatest Jesuit missionaries at that time, maybe
Well,
17?
preceding that time, the late 16, early 1700s.
Yeah.
Well, the greatest one in Baja California and southern Arizona he also founded San Javier del Bac and a number of others, was Padre Eusebio Kino.
Oh, I've heard of him.
Yeah,
Qino.
Kino,
Oh, Kino. Okay.
Padre Kino. And he did an amazing job evangelizing what's now Sonora, Southern Arizona, and Baja California.
Oh, okay.
And actually, because the Jesuits were expelled, to this day, there are parishes in Mexico that have not had resident pastors since that time. And there were riots in favor of them and so on. So it began slowly the destabilization of not just Mexico, but other parts of Latin America that would eventually, decades later, contribute to the revolutions.
It's what are some other Francis Xavier? Was he one?
Sure, St. Francis Xavier was a famous one. Father Matteo Ricci in China. I can't think of the names, but they had them in Japan. India, Father De Nobili.
Was
Uh,
Desmet Jesuit?
uh, yes, I think he was. Let me make sure I know what I'm talking about. I think
Because
Desmet
I
was
thought he
Jesuit.
was one of your faves.
He is, but let me make sure he was a Jebi. Yes, he was a Jesuit. I'm sure he was.
Because he's got a book even of his story. That's if I forgot
and
his
Desmet
term.
was, yeah, he was a Jesuit, all right. And he was in the 19th century, of course.
Yeah.
They had a lot of them.
Yeah.
And some of the most glorious chapters in the missionary history of the church on every continent were written by Jesuits.
Okay. It's just fascinating to me. I'm really getting into the missionary, work and the mindset of Junipero Serra and stuff. And I feel like we need that now more than ever. We can't
Oh,
isolate ourselves. As
well, it all goes back, I'm afraid, though, to what Benedict XVI said about this, and that was it's worth quoting in this area because he Benedict XVI in this interview with a Jesuit in 2016. He made a very interesting comment, uh, which is worth everyone thinking about because it.
I think I remember it just verbatim. What if salvation is separated from faith? Faith becomes unmotivated. Something like that. Is that what
Yeah,
you're thinking of?
exactly. But he made a very trenchant comment. Here it is. This is it. It's a very interesting thing because it also shows you how far from reality uh, everyone has gotten. He says he notes uh, he makes the comment that let's see the and I mean he speaks on behalf, you might say, of modern theologians, and then he admits he doesn't have an answer. Uh, Here we go. He says. Uh, there is no doubt that on this point, he says, his interviewer, who's a Jesuit called Father Servet, um, in the spiritual exercises, Ignatius of Loyola does not use the Old Testament images of revenge as opposed to Paul. Nevertheless, he invites us to contemplate how men until the incarnation descended into hell, and to consider the example of the, quote, countless others who ended up there for far fewer sins than I have committed, end of quote. It is in this spirit that St. Francis Xavier lived his pastoral work, convinced he had to try to save from the terrible fate of eternal damnation as many quote unquote infidels as possible. The teaching formalized in the Council of Trent in the passage with regard to the judgment of the good and the evil, later radicalized by the Jansenists, was taken up in a much more restrained way in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. There's a lot of internal contradiction in what is just said there. If it's formalized in the Council of Trent, then it's true. End of story. But never mind. Can it be said on this point in recent decades there's been a kind of development of dogma that the Catechism should definitely take into account? Here's what Benedict says, and this is the most sincere thing anybody has said here. Quote, there is no doubt that on this point we are faced with a profound evolution of dogma. While the fathers and theologians of the Middle Ages could still be of the opinion that essentially the whole human race had become Catholic and that paganism existed now only on the margins, actually they didn't believe that. And certainly the church fathers, writing in the early days of the church when we were a very small minority in the midst of an all pagan world, they did not believe that the whole human race would become Catholic. But never mind. He says the discovery of the New World at the beginning of the modern era radically changed perspectives, meaning suddenly they find there are all these pagans going to hell. But you see, that was the way it was when the church started. That's why the church fathers evangelized so furiously the way St. Francis Xavier did. In the second half of the last century, it has been fully affirmed the understanding that God cannot let go to perdition all the unbaptized, and that even a purely natural happiness for them does not represent a real answer to the question of human existence. Now, so you hear speculation is being put over defined dogma, but he's very honest. So he believes this. He believes this understanding and so on. But then he says, if it is true that the great missionaries of the 16th century and 17th and 18th and 19th, I would say, we're still convinced that those who are not baptized are forever lost. And this explains their missionary commitment. In the Catholic Church, after the Second Vatican Council, that conviction was finally abandoned. From this came a deep double crisis. On the one hand, this seems to remove any motivation for a future missionary commitment. Why should one try to convince the people to accept the Christian faith when they can be saved even without it? But also for Christians, an issue emerged. The obligatory nature of the faith and its way of life began to seem uncertain and problematic. If there are those who can save themselves in other ways, it is not clear in the final analysis why the Christian himself is bound by the requirements of the Christian faith and its morals. If faith and salvation are no longer interdependent, faith itself becomes unmotivated. Yep. Then he says, lately several attempts have been formulated in order to reconcile the universal necessity of the Christian faith with the opportunity to save oneself without it. I'll mention here too. He talks about Karl Rahner and the anonymous Christian, and then the other, which he says is even less acceptable. He knocks that out of the park. And then he says even less acceptable is the solution proposed by the pluralistic theories of religion, for which all religions, each in their own way, would be ways of salvation. And in this sense, in their effects must be considered more realistic, more concrete. So he throws that out. And then he talks about de Lubac and these people, and then he sends all that out. And he ends by saying, it is clear that we need to further reflect on the whole question. Well, here's a real radical thought. What if the gospel, the church fathers, the scholastics, the great missionaries, and the definitions of the councils down to and including Trent are right, and our modern speculative theologians are wrong? Nah,
that's so disappointing to hear him say, we need to reflect, because it's all there already.
Well, it's there, but it's a conclusion he doesn't want to go to.
Yeah.
It's like with the document on limbo. The same thing happens. Lines the whole thing up, and is quite clear that historically speaking, limbo is exactly what the church taught. But then, as it says, in the middle of the 20th century, theologians began to demand the right to imagine new solutions to the problem. And then they go off into speculation. But the problem on all sides there is that theology ceases to be a science of objective truth and becomes an exercise in subjective fantasy. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, especially when it's indulged in the very highest echelon of the church. It's not for me to say, in the immortal words of that great theologian, Johnny Mathis.
Right.
You know, he was a great theologian.
Of course. He had a great
In fact,
voice, too.
I think what he has to say here on this very point about authority is worth remembering. And he says, and I quote, and I think this is very important. He says, "It's not for me to say, you love me. It's not for me to say, you'll always care. Oh, but here for the moment I can hold you fast and press your lips to mine and dream that love will last. As far as I can see, this is heaven. And speaking just for me, it's ours to share. Perhaps the glow of love will grow with every passing day. Or we may never meet again, but then it's not for me to say. And speaking just for me, it's ours to share. Perhaps the glow of love will grow with every passing day. Or we may never meet again. But then again, it's not for me to say."
Well,
I
okay.
think the on the one hand, the rumors that Johnny Mathis is going to get the red hat for his theological contributions at the next consistory may not be entirely true. But on the other hand, his lifestyle choices would seem to indicate that he's a prime candidate for that kind of elevation.
Okay, I'm not going to ask any clarification or expand on that. I'm just going to use my imagination, and we'll leave it at that.
All right, it's not for me to say either.
Okay, well, we're out of time. We are out of time for the pre-show.
Can you imagine that, ladies and gentlemen? Out of time, out of mind. But remember, if it's the 12th of never, that's a very long time.
That's so profound. I will meditate upon that.
I just want to say, look at me. I'm as awkward as a kitten in a tree. I get misty.
Okay.
I think Johnny Mathis may be the tutelary spirit for the real show.
We'll see.
I mean, look,
I'll let you hone in on his spirit. I'm going to stay delightfully aloof.
Let me ask you one question.
What?
If Liberace was right, can we say that Johnny Mathis was wrong? And if so, why not?
Were the two opposed to each other, or are they opposite forces?
Not to my knowledge. I think we're making a petty distinction, really, here. I think that we need to expand the conversation.
Expanding the conversation is overrated, because then you have to include a lot of dumb people. I don't want to include dumb people.
Dumb people have rights
here's a question for you, Charles.
Okay.
Did anyone at the Council of Elrond say, you know what, let's expand the conversation?
Yeah, let's include the orcs. No one's heard from the orcs yet, or the trolls. Let's get their insights. Well, they did. That's why you see in the in some of the writings of Tolkien that haven't yet been published, there was the famous Synod of Elrond, where in the name of synodality, they included orcs and trolls, talking beavers, centaurs, even Father Christmas. They expanded the conversation to include Narnians and Telmarines and Calormenes.
You're too greedy on that one. You never had me for a second on that one, Charles. Too greedy. Yeah, the unwritten tales. Yeah, okay.
Now there's a volume of Tolkien we'd love to see. Unwritten Tales by J.R.R. Tolkien. And you know what? It'd be blank pages. It'd be one of those novelty books, but the thing is, you'd have to bind it in such a way that it would be exactly like the regular series.
Yeah.
You know, if you've got all the published things now, they're all roughly the same size. So you'd have one last one, Unwritten Tales, J.R.R. Tolkien, and you'd have some real Middle-earthic artwork on the cover. You'd have the same, the spine would be the same lettering and all. It would fit. It's just when you open it up, it's blank pages.
I think you would get sued for scamming people.
I don't know, because the way the Tolkien estate is giving rights out right and left. I mean, as long as they got their share, I don't think anybody would care. Well, look, if they don't have a problem with the Rings of Power, they're not going to have a problem with Tolkien's Unwritten Tales.
I can't comment. I'm blissfully ignorant of the Rings of Power.
Well, me too. But, the other good thing, too, is that people could buy a copy of Tolkien's Unwritten Tales and, do fan fiction in them.
That's true. I guess Tolkien didn't write that. Yeah, unwritten.
Yeah, it says Unwritten Tales. So if you write, Galadriel and Fili, the untold story, have at it.
Okay. Well, hopefully you have to be careful with that one, because I believe even the Tolkien Society is going woke. So that could go in. Even Twitter, they went really weird on Sam and Frodo. There's a lot of weird stuff out there. I don't like it. Danger zone.
Danger, Will Robinson. Danger, Will Robinson. I think what it really is. We're at an episode of Sliders where the universe has gone gay. And if you see those guys wandering around, kind of staring at the rainbow's flags and wondering what's happened, you'll know that we're all living in an alternate universe, and this isn't the real one. Or at least it isn't Earth Prime, I guess you would say.
Right. Okay, well, that's a consoling thought.
Sure. Yes, indeed, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here first. All the wacko stuff you're seeing is because we're living in a parallel universe, and it's not the real one. So I want everyone here and now to be very grateful and happy to the fact that they're real equivalents, because we're just, imitations. The real you is at this moment having a very good time on Earth Prime, where everything is run correctly and everything is good. I mean, you may be going through guff at the moment, just like in Sliders, like they'd have an ice age and everybody gets wiped out, and the equivalent of you in that universe froze to death 2 years ago. But the real you, of course, was happy all this time on Earth Prime.
Nice.
Feel better now?
I feel a lot better.
I don't know why, but anyhow, that's great. I'm glad to help.
All right, that's it for the pre-show, but stay tuned for the full episode coming right at you.
Directly from Earth Prime. We'll see you in a little bit, kids.
See ya.